Logic for homeschoolers, or for anyone really. A very brief introduction to basic logic, lesson 4. Let's talk about validity, invalidity, soundness, unsoundness, strength, weakness, cogency, and uncogency. These are the technical terms we use in logic to describe the characteristics of arguments. Every argument has either 2 or 4 characteristics that we need to be able to identify. I'll just keep records of changes I make, and I can adjust them in the original version of this document. That was an ugly typo. Identify, not identity. Every argument has either 2 characteristics or 4 characteristics that we need to be able to identify. An argument either has premises that guarantee its conclusion, or it doesn't. If it does not, then those premises will at least make the conclusion probable, or they won't. And the premises of an argument are either true or not. I'm finding so many typos. It's embarrassing. So let's learn what are the different characteristics of arguments based on these 3 things. Either the premises are guaranteed or they're not. Either they make the conclusion probable or they don't. If they fail to guarantee it, they can at least do that or not. And the premises either are true or not. So let's learn what are the different characteristics of arguments and some vocabulary words that you need to use a lot for the rest of a course on logic. First, a valid argument means an argument in which it is not possible for the premises to be true and the conclusion false. So let me rephrase that. A valid argument is an argument in which it is not possible for the premises to be true and the conclusion false. Another way we can say this is an argument is valid if the premises guarantee the conclusion. If it is not possible, once again, for the premises to be true and the conclusion false at the same time, then the argument is valid. This is a technical term. You may not use the word validity in this way outside of logic class, but you must use it in this way. And I think in no other way in logic class, that's what the word means. An invalid argument is not necessarily a bad one, however. An argument is valid if the premises guarantee the conclusion, but invalidity is not necessarily a bad thing. It might still have a good probability from premises to conclusion. Validity preserves truth. That means that when we move from the premises to the conclusion of a valid argument, we cannot be moving from true statements to a false statement. You can't go from true statements to a false statement when you go from premises to conclusion in a valid argument. And if you can, then the argument's not valid. Validity is binary. An argument either has it or does not. And then once an argument is valid, we have to figure out if the premises are true. And if they are, then the argument is considered sound. Otherwise, it's considered unsound. And then an argument that's not valid is simply invalid. So more terms. A valid argument is one in which it's not possible for the premises to be true and the conclusion false at the same time. An invalid argument is an argument which is not valid. It is possible for premises to be true and conclusion false at the same time. A sound argument is a valid one with true premises. And the conclusion of every sound argument is true, always, no exceptions. An unsound argument is one that's not sound, but that could be for one of 2 reasons. Either it's invalid or it has at least one false premise, possibly both. An argument that is invalid may be either strong or weak. A strong argument is an invalid argument whose premises do make their conclusion probable. A weak argument is an invalid argument whose premises do not make their conclusion probable, or an invalid argument that is not strong. Now, we don't classify valid arguments as strong or weak. Validity is better than strength. Strong is good, validity is better. Weakness is less good. Now, what about an argument with exactly 50% probability? Is it strong or weak, as this argument here? Half of all Star Wars movies are good, so the next Star Wars movie will be good. Well, that only gives 50% probability to its conclusion. Well, look at the definition. If the premises make their conclusion probable, which means greater than 50%, then the argument is strong, assuming it's invalid in the first place. Otherwise, it's not strong, and therefore it has to be weak, meaning exactly 50% probability, that's a weak argument, not a strong one. There's no in between. For invalid arguments, strength and weakness are binary. It's either one or the other, but that's not true of all arguments. Valid arguments are neither strong nor weak. They're better than strong. So, the premise of this argument does not make its conclusion probable, just 50%, so it's a weak argument. Now, if an argument is strong, invalid, but strong, you still have to wonder if the premises are true. If they are, the argument is what we call cogent, and if they're not, it's what we call uncogent. A cogent argument is an argument that's strong and has true premises. An uncogent argument is an invalid argument that is not cogent, an argument that either is weak or has at least one false premise. Now, for invalid arguments, cogency, uncogency is binary. An argument either is cogent or uncogent. If the premises are true and the argument is strong, it's cogent, otherwise it's uncogent. But cogency, uncogency is not binary for all arguments because valid arguments are not cogent or uncogent. They're better than cogent. And this is a line I've been using for, well, at this point, something like 15 years. Strength is to cogency what validity is to soundness. They're both good things for an argument to have, but they need true premises to be the best kinds of arguments. So an argument can have any of these combinations of characteristics. It can be valid and sound, that's 2, or valid and unsound, that's 2, or invalid, and all invalid arguments are unsound. So an argument could be invalid, unsound, strong cogent, or invalid, unsound, strong uncogent if a premise is false, or invalid, unsound, weak, and uncogent. Those are the only possible combinations, those 2 or those 4, valid and sound, valid and unsound, invalid, unsound, strong cogent, invalid, unsound, strong uncogent, invalid, unsound, weak, uncogent. And here's a chart that might be helpful in keeping track of all this. I hope it's entirely visible on the screen here. I realize this is small font. Just a moment. And here we are with my face not in the way, and I've been able to zoom in a little bit. Hopefully it will be a little visible on some screens. Arguments are either valid or invalid. If they're valid, they either have true premises or don't have true premises, which determines whether they're sound or unsound. And if they're invalid, they're all unsound, and then they're either weak or strong. If they're weak, they're uncogent. If they're strong, they either have true premises or don't have true premises. They're either cogent or uncogent accordingly. Note that for valid arguments, oh goodness, this Zoom thing is terribly annoying. There we go. Note that for valid arguments, you have this issue of whether they are cogent or uncogent. Sorry, for valid arguments, you have this issue of whether they're sound or unsound based on whether the premises are true or false. And for invalid and unsound but strong arguments, you have the same issue. Well, a parallel issue is what I should say. You have a parallel issue if the premises are true. It's cogent. If they're untrue, the argument is uncogent. All right, those are the characteristics of arguments. I better pause the recording while I get my screen back in. All right, a few more observations on strength. Validity is binary. An argument is valid or not. Strength is not binary. Whether an invalid argument is strong or weak, that's binary. But strength itself must not be thought of so simply. Strength comes in degrees. While an invalid argument is either strong or weak, a strong argument with 51% probability and a strong argument with 99.9% probability are very different. The Power of Logic by Lehman, Wasserman, and the Howard Snyders, 3rd edition, page 37, points out that there are different ways of describing an argument's strength. An argument could be slightly strong or extremely strong, and various other adverbs would apply in between. Now, how strong is strong enough? 51% probability makes an argument strong, but I wouldn't want to bet my life on that strength unless I had no other choice. I wouldn't even bet my life on 83.33333% strength if I didn't have to. I might bet $10 to $15 on 80% strength. An argument about Russian roulette could be weaker than an argument about going to the movies, even if the weaker argument has a higher probability. Or maybe instead of weak, I should be saying less strong here. Considering simply the math, if you could determine that the premises of an argument about Russian roulette rendered their conclusion more probable than the premises of an argument about going to the movies rendered their conclusion, you could say, considering just the math, you could say that one argument is stronger than the other. But considering the stakes, considering the consequences, considering everything else, clearly one argument is, clearly the stronger argument is the weaker one. The one stronger mathematically is the weaker one for getting the job done. What's the job? providing good enough support for the conclusion. And some conclusions need more support than others. So if I've enjoyed 4 out of 5 of the last Pixar movies, that might be pretty good evidence that I should enjoy the next one. And maybe it's good enough, 80% probability, pretty good for spending a couple hours of my life and $10 to $15. But a greater probability, 5 out of 6, roughly 83.3333% odds, that's not nearly enough for pointing a gun at my head and pulling the trigger. I have a 5 out of 6 chance of surviving Russian roulette. And you can make an argument that I will survive Russian roulette. But it's not a strong enough argument. In other words, context and the topic of an argument and what depends on the argument matter a great deal in determining just how strong an argument is and whether it is strong enough. And there will be some gray areas. Maybe you wouldn't want to pay to see a movie on just 65% odds that you would enjoy it, but maybe you do it at 80% odds. And maybe you don't even know whether the line between them is closer to 70 or 75%. Now, a few notes on, maybe just one note on terminology, several notes on terminology. Only propositions are true or false. We don't say that arguments are true. Only arguments are valid, invalid, sound, strongly cogent, uncogent. Statements are not valid, unsound, etc., etc. Outside of logic class, you might speak differently. Inside logic class, you must use these technical terms. Using ordinary English, a statement might be valid, meaning acceptable or legitimate or reasonable. Or you might say an argument is true, meaning it's reliable, or that is, conclusion is true or is well supported by its premises, but we're not using ordinary English in logic class. There are particular characteristics of propositions and of arguments that we're concerned with here, and we have to call them something. And these are the things they're called in logic class. These are the things, these are the only things I've ever heard them called. And these are the terms used in the textbooks. These are what we call them these days. And I don't know of any other terms unless we're just going to start making up words. So here we are. These are our technical terms. If you don't like it, I'm sorry. You just have to deal with it. And that is all. Thanks for watching.